Two crossings, one ship, and somewhere between them, a lonely stone bridge waits deep in the Corsican mountains. This is the line from Livorno to Bastia. The crossing takes about 5 hours across the Ligurian Sea and toward the northeast coast of Corsica. After the drive to the ferry terminal, we follow the boarding of PASCAL LOTA and take a look around her passenger areas. Then she settles into a calm daytime crossing with several quiet hours at sea before Corsica comes closer. But the journey does not end at the harbour. On the island we continue inland into the mountains toward an old Genoese stone bridge hidden between rock, water and silence. And after that the same ferry route takes us back across the sea from Corsica to Italy. For those who prefer the crossing completely pure, the full version is available in the Just Ferries members area, along with some extra shots and details. After the short intro, the journey begins. Another day in paradise, at least for ferry enthusiasts. This time, however, paradise begins in Livorno, which was not exactly the original plan. I was supposed to be on Corsica already after taking the night ferry from Toulon to Ajaccio one day earlier. Then the rental car decided to become the main character. After about 15 minutes on the motorway, it gave up in a fairly convincing manner. So the original plan disappeared, along with a few additional costs that remained, let us say, administratively lonely. The result is a new route, not Toulon to Ajaccio, but Livorno to Bastia, and waiting here in the port is PASCAL LOTA. There are other ferries in Livorno as well, of course, but today they will have to accept a rare supporting role. Some local names in this film may not sound exactly as they do on Corsica itself. This is not disrespect. It is simply what happens when a German ferry enthusiast is left unsupervised with French, Italian and Corsican vowels. Local speakers are, of course, entirely welcome to wince with dignity. Complaints may be sent to the Department of Linguistic Damage Control, which currently has no office, no staff and a deeply relaxed attitude toward incoming correspondence. For the check-in time, I follow the information sent by Corsica Ferries directly by email. Like almost all of my ferry trips, this booking was made online in advance, from home. And conveniently, Corsica Ferries also sends a separate information email telling me when I am expected at the port. For this departure, that time is 11 o'clock. There is, however, a small discussion at the barrier. It is a little before 11 o'clock, 10:54 to be exact. The barrier will not open for me because I am too early, 6 minutes early. And 6 minutes early at this particular gate does not get you into the port. It gets me a discussion I can, of course, only lose. So be it, reverse gear, back out, and wait for the official 6 minutes to complete their important work. Parking options here are rather limited, so there are two practical ways to survive the next 6 minutes. Find a free space or continue gently orbiting the port area until official time and real life agree with each other. Apparently, I am not the only one who appreciates clear instructions. A few other vehicles have already arrived before me. There are, in fairness, worse places to spend 6 rejected minutes. The port of Livorno offers ferries in almost every direction, which, for a ferry enthusiast, reduces the level of personal suffering quite considerably. I'm still outside the barrier, of course, but at least I am outside the barrier with a view. By now, the famous 6 minutes have passed. It is 11:10 and I have completed roughly my 20th orbit of the port area, a personal record I had not planned to set today. I circle like a patient hunter, waiting for the barrier to accept reality. And I am not alone. Other drivers are turned away too. They reverse from the gate, reconsider their life choices for a moment, and join the small circulating ecosystem outside the terminal. Opening the barrier, it seems, is not yet part of the official concept. Perhaps it is being saved for a later phase of the project. It is now 11:15 and more vehicles are gathering in front of the mysterious barrier. The barrier itself remains unmoved. Perhaps it has forgotten that it is a barrier. And just as I am reaching expert level in circular driving, something finally happens. 20 minutes after the check-in time promised in the official email, the system appears to recall its original purpose. The barrier opens, slowly, with the quiet dignity of something that has thought it over and chosen at last to cooperate. And then, at last, space. After 20 minutes of driving in circles, this parking area feels almost luxurious, which says less about the parking area and rather more about the previous 20 minutes. Because of the rental car disaster earlier in the trip, I will be under some time pressure on Corsica later today. So, for once, I booked Corsica Ferries' top position offer. It costs 20 euros extra and in theory, it places the car near the ship's doors, so it can leave among the first vehicles after arrival. That is exactly what I need. The port staff now notice this on the booking and I am sent into a different lane. A small administrative detour, but this time at least one with a purpose. After some internal deliberation, the verdict is handed down. I am 1 meter too far left. Naturally, this must be corrected. 6 minutes too early, 1 meter too far left. At this terminal, tolerance appears to be more of a theoretical department. And from the outside, this is what top position looks like. A small sticker on the vehicle. This little piece of adhesive paperwork is now responsible for making the whole system work later on board. I am, as you may imagine, watching this process with considerable professional curiosity. And here she comes. PASCAL LOTA is not a ferry with just one life. She was built in Italy by Fincantieri and entered service for Tallink at the end of April 2008. Back then, she was called Superstar. Her first job was the Tallinn to Helsinki shuttle across the Gulf of Finland. A short route, but not exactly an easy one. 2 capitals, heavy passenger traffic, freight, cars, buses, winter conditions and a timetable with very little interest in excuses. These archive shots show her in Helsinki, back when she was still almost new and still sailing as Superstar. The paint scheme may require a short period of visual adjustment. Tallink clearly wanted her to look modern, fresh and environmentally ambitious. Whether the human eye was fully consulted during that process is a separate question. Her machinery is not shy either. 4 Wärtsilä diesel engines produce 50,400 kilowatts driving 2 controllable pitch propellers. As I drive on board, I already suspect this will not be a punctual departure. And every minute lost here is a minute my hotel check-in window, which is not especially interested in ferry delays, will quietly subtract later. Outside, the top position sticker has done its diplomatic work. Now it enters the more serious phase of its career. It must be understood on board, preferably without me delivering a small lecture on adhesive paperwork and operational hope. At first there is some confusion, followed by a rather energetic discussion among the staff. I do not understand a word, so I will not pretend to know the subject, but it does not sound like a conversation held during a wellness treatment. For 20 euros extra, I am now the first private car on board. Pole position, at least in ferry terms. Now I can only hope this small victory will get me to my hotel in time. Because after a day like this, I would take a bed and running water over a rather authentic night in a lonely shepherd's hut. With this rather excellent position directly in front of the inner bow door, Corsica Ferries has kept its promise. For the moment at least, the plan is working. The car is exactly where it needs to be, and my chances of escaping quickly in Bastia have improved from theoretical to cautiously believable. Time to leave the vehicle deck and head up into the passenger areas. PASCAL LOTA can finally be explored properly. Once the crossing begins, the car decks below are closed. You won't see your vehicle again until Bastia, so whatever you need, you take it with you. For passengers, that leaves deck 6, 7, 8 and 9. Deck plans can be found in several places on board. 10 decks in total, though the plan on the wall has quietly decided to show only 9. Decks 6 and 7 are mainly cabin territory, which means they are interesting only if you have a key card, a cabin number, or a very optimistic sense of curiosity. Deck 8 is the main passenger deck, where most of the public life on board is concentrated. Deck 9, meanwhile, is the open-air level, with the sun deck, a bar and an enclosed aft area that feels a little like a winter garden with a sea view. One of the most striking spaces on board is this large forward atrium. It rises through 3 decks and gives the ferry a sense of scale you don't find on every crossing. Some time ago, part of the lower level was rebuilt with additional cabins added on deck 6, so the space is a little smaller than it used to be, but the effect is still remarkable. There is something wonderfully unnecessary about it in the best possible sense. A ferry does not strictly need a space like this to work properly, but this ship is much better for having it. For me, this is the clear highlight of the interior. In the same area, we also find the à la carte restaurant Dolce Vita. One small but practical detail: the menu is digital, and you can read it in 4 different languages. Just behind Dolce Vita, the food geography continues. Sweet Café is the coffee shop part of the system. Next to it is Yellow's, the self-service restaurant. Salad, main course, dessert and no great diplomatic protocol. A little farther aft is Main Street, the burger and hot dog corner of the ship. The promise here is authentic burgers, always a confident statement once ferry logistics become involved. Still, the idea is clear. A small American dream placed on board an Italian ferry between Italy and Corsica. That is either cultural fusion or simply a very efficient way to make lunch less complicated. Of course, there is also a shop on board. It offers things you genuinely need, things you might need, and things whose usefulness becomes far more convincing once you are at sea. A charger, a bottle of perfume, a Corsican souvenir you had no intention of buying until 30 seconds ago. Toward the stern, the ship opens into the Riviera Lounge coffee shop, one of the more generous spaces on board, arranged across 2 decks with large glass surfaces and Pullman seats facing the sea. For completeness, La Veranda should also be mentioned. Not the area shown here, but a separate space closed on this crossing. Normally, it is the ship's all-you-can-eat buffet, a concept that sounds harmless until passengers begin making strategic calculations involving hunger, sailing time, and plate size. Out on deck 9, the sun deck delivers its most essential feature: sun. That part of the concept works beautifully. Less ideal is the access along the railings. Large parts are closed off, something I've seen on some sister ships too, though not all. I'm not entirely sure why. Perhaps the wind up here is more assertive, perhaps some other operational reason. For anyone who likes standing at the rail, watching the sea, and pretending this is a perfectly normal way to spend valuable travel time, it's a real loss. A sun deck without full access to the rail is still a sun deck, but it loses some of its best argument. Eventually, I do find an outside area where it's possible to get closer to the sea. Reaching it, however, is less straightforward than the distance suggests. First, I have to go back down to deck 8, then up again to deck 9. Visually, the two open areas are almost neighbors. In practice, they behave like separate islands, within sight of each other and apparently not on speaking terms. A small ferry service between them would almost make sense, which, on a ferry, feels both absurd and strangely appropriate. By now, it is 1400. Departure was scheduled for 1345. There are still quite a few vehicles waiting to be loaded. That is not a good sign. For me, that is more than just an interesting loading operation, because on Corsica, I still have to reach my hotel before check-in closes, so the calculation begins. How much still has to go on board? How long loading may take? How late we may arrive in Bastia, and how much time will be left for the drive across the island. At this point, the delay is no longer just a ferry delay. It is beginning to affect the rest of the day. At least there is movement. Not continuous, admittedly. Loading starts, pauses, then starts again, with some of these stops lasting 5 or even 10 minutes. I'll spare you most of that in the edit, since watching stationary vehicles for too long is a very reliable way to test viewer loyalty. The point is clear enough. Loading continues, just not at a speed that makes my evening plans on Corsica feel especially secure. At 14:45, exactly 1 hour after the scheduled departure, the quay is finally empty. Everything is on board. I allow myself a brief moment of optimism. At last, surely, we are ready to go. Another 20 minutes pass before the ship actually starts moving, and no reason for the delay is announced. That kind of silence is not especially helpful when there is still a hotel check-in deadline waiting on Corsica. By now, my inner calm is somewhere close to boiling point. I begin to consider alternative accommodation plans, mainly lonely shepherds' huts in the Corsican mountains. They may be romantic in theory, they are rather less attractive when chosen by timetable collapse. We are finally underway, and a considerable weight lifts from my shoulders. Now the calculation changes. The delay is still there, but at least the ship can begin to work against it. And for that, this ferry has the right pedigree. She was built for the short, demanding shuttle between Tallinn and Helsinki, where speed was never an accessory. It was part of the business model. So, for the next few hours, my hopes rest on 4 diesel engines, 2 propellers, and the faint possibility that a timetable can still be rescued at sea. Not the most conventional source of comfort, but today it will have to do. Slowly, the harbor begins to let us go. The engines are still running gently, far below their full power, easing the ship out past the quays in no particular hurry. The water opens. The town softens into the haze behind us. The delay is still there. The check-in deadline on Corsica is still waiting, but for these few minutes none of it can be hurried anyway, so I let it rest. At the end of the long breakwater, a small lighthouse waits. It was built in 1857 when the sea wall first reached out into the Ligurian Sea. There were two of them, one at each end, and both towers still stand today, but only one still carries a light. This one. It turns every 3 seconds the way it has for more than a century and a half. The other has long gone dark. We pass it slowly. Behind us, Livorno. Ahead, only open water, and somewhere beyond the horizon, Corsica. As beautiful as this crossing is, my private illusion that the ferry might now make up the lost time at serious speed does not really survive contact with reality. Perhaps she is running a little faster than she normally would on this route. Perhaps the difference is simply too small to notice from a passenger deck. Either way, Bastia is still not coming closer quickly enough for my taste. And so, while the sea has a bit of weather in it, the view stays pleasant and the ship carries on with reassuring competence, my increasingly unreasonable wish to get out and push her along does not entirely go away. If I cannot make the ship go faster, I can at least give myself a task with the faint outline of control. I head to Main Street for a Manhattan hot dog. New York has probably solved larger problems than a delayed ferry. Today, though, its representative on board is mainly responsible for morale. And then Corsica appears properly. Not as a port yet, and not as the end of the crossing, but as mountains already standing tall above the water, far bigger than a first glimpse has any right to be. In good visibility, the island shows itself long before Bastia is anywhere near, and that changes the feeling of the crossing. For hours, the ship has been moving toward an idea. Now there is something solid out there with real height and real weight. After the delay, the loading, the calculations, and one morale supporting Manhattan hot dog, that sight of land is very welcome indeed. It is now 1845. According to the timetable, the ship should be alongside in Bastia at this very moment, bow door preparing to open. That is not quite where we are. Bastia is already in sight, which is at least a useful emotional improvement. But there are still several nautical miles between the ferry and the berth, so the situation has become fairly simple. Corsica is visible, the destination is real, and we are late. All three things are now simply true at the same time. There are places that are simply destinations, and there are places that seem to hold more time than they should. Bastia is the second kind. The city grew around a Genoese stronghold, the old harbour below and the citadel keeping watch above. For centuries, boats have come in from this same sea, low in the water with cargo or bringing the people who kept the port alive. Traders and governors, sailors and soldiers, and no doubt a fair number of dreamers, each of them convinced for a moment that their arrival mattered more than all the others. And perhaps that is the quiet truth of a place like this. Walls do not make a harbour, ships do. The stone has stood here for centuries, but it was never the point. The point was always what came across the water toward it. I am no different. One more traveller on one more evening, arriving the way countless others have arrived before me. Bastia has seen it 1,000 times. Everything here began small. Long before the citadel, before Genoa, fishermen pulled their boats onto this shore and traded wine across the water with the Pisans, a modest place built on fish and patience. Out of that grew a city of two halves. The powerful took the height behind their walls, watching the sea. The traders and craftsmen stayed below, close to the boats where the real work was done. Money and cargo down by the water, authority up on the rock. And when the old harbour could no longer hold all that came and went, the city simply built a bigger one. That was in 1862, as Bastia's maritime trade and its links to the mainland kept growing. Ships like this one would have been unimaginable to the first fishermen here. Modern giants against a backdrop of Genoese stone, just the newest arrivals in a very long line. By now it is 1925. The sun has already dropped behind the mountains and long shadows are moving across Bastia, a beautiful sight and not especially useful for my remaining schedule. The hotel is still somewhere up in the hills, and reaching it in time would now call for a style of driving better suited to a rally stage than to a calm travel film. Naturally, part of me wants to go down and help with the mooring. Not because anyone invited me and not because anyone needs me, but simply because standing still while time disappears is a deeply inefficient form of suffering.
Passengers of the vehicles parked in the garage number 3 and 4 are kindly requested to proceed to the car deck on disembarkation.
At 1934, things finally begin to move. The first announcements call passengers back to their vehicles, including those parked on deck 3. That includes me. And this is the moment when the extra booking has to prove its value. Everything it promised in the reservation now comes down to what happens here on the vehicle deck, with Bastia outside and the evening already far more advanced than I would like. For 20 euros, top position now has one simple task: turn priority into movement. I will spare you the next 4 minutes. Watching the inner bow door open in real time is a test of patience, and my spoken contribution to the process is not exactly suited to a calm ferry documentary. When you are sitting on hot coals, every minute develops an impressive amount of personality. So we go straight to the result. The extra booking works. I am the very first vehicle to roll ashore in Bastia, a small but genuine victory. At the same moment, reality is waiting on the quay with a clipboard. The hotel is still not in the bag, nobody has answered the phone, and my written messages have gone unanswered too. So, Corsica welcomes me with a beautiful evening, an open road, and a fairly generous amount of uncertainty. Leaving a ferry port is not always as simple as rolling off and driving away. Sometimes there are checks at the exit, and tonight, of all nights, I would rather not be the car that gets waved aside. Dear ferry friend, if you have a spare set of crossed fingers, now would be the time. If anyone is going to be waved aside for a check, the first car off the ship is the obvious candidate. Fortunately, my optimism remains available for emergency use. And it works. Nobody shows the slightest interest in me, which for once is exactly the level of attention I was hoping for. The exit is clear and my relief is considerable. Now there are about 80 kilometers ahead of me, roughly 1 hour and 30 minutes through Corsica into the hills. First, the route leads through the streets of Bastia, and this part can easily become much less cooperative. Today though, the streets are surprisingly reasonable. A moderately busy road can feel like a gift. Kilometer by kilometer, the road carries me across the island, and normally this would be the point where local drivers begin to appear behind me with quiet determination. On Corsica, being overtaken can sometimes feel less like criticism and more like a cultural exchange, but this time nobody passes me. Apparently, my speed is acceptable by local standards, and if this continues, I may soon qualify for provisional membership. Unfortunately, the camera is less impressed by my progress. At some point, the battery gives up, and although I would normally connect a charging cable and carry on, today there is simply no time left for that. By now, I am seriously late, and every additional stop has become a luxury item the schedule can no longer afford. In the end, I can reveal this much. I do not make it in time, but that is a story for tomorrow. In that spirit, good night. The next morning, I'm on my way to the real discovery of this trip, Pont de Zalia. But before we get there, one question from last night still needs an answer. Where did I actually spend the night? The answer is simple. In the hotel. Not on time, not elegantly, but in a real bed with walls, a roof and running water, which by that stage felt like a fairly advanced form of civilization. When I finally reached the small mountain village, the place had already entered its deeply quiet phase. The sidewalks were, figuratively speaking, folded away, and there was not a soul in sight. Only one dog remained on duty, giving my late arrival the full acoustic treatment. With a bit of luck, I still managed to reach the hotel owner. About 10 minutes later, she came over and let me in, and that is one of those things that can happen on Corsica. The official window may close, the village may fall silent, and the traveler may briefly consider a cold shepherd's hut as an emergency housing concept. But then somebody appears, unlocks a door, and the island becomes considerably more forgiving. A fantastic service, and a very welcome reminder that not every travel problem ends with straw, goats, and a questionable roof. The next part of the journey leads into the Spelunker Gorge. Every ferry trip has a reason beyond the ramp, and today that reason lies somewhere down this path. The destination is the Pont de Zalia, an old Genoese stone bridge, hidden deep enough in the mountains to make the arrival feel earned. It is not a long hike in distance, but it is a very clear change of world. Footsteps, stone, water, and the slow realization that Corsica is not especially interested in making things too convenient. That is part of the charm, and part of the invoice, paid in sweat rather than euros. After about 45 minutes on foot, the Pont de Zalia is finally reached. According to the information board, the bridge was planned as early as 1712 and finally built in 1797 by the master mason Antonio Benza. Its purpose was practical rather than romantic. It helped shepherds and local people move through this difficult landscape more easily. The board describes it as one of the Genoese bridges of Corsica, and its wide arch was not built for drama. It was built because the seasonal flow of the Tavolela and its tributaries can be powerful enough to demand respect, which, standing here after the walk, feels entirely believable. The bridge stays behind and the trail leads back the way it came. One last walk through the gorge before the day belongs to the road again. Corsica is not quite finished with me yet. There is still the 1st of April, a full day of driving across the island, the kind of scenery that makes ferry schedules feel briefly less important. Only briefly, of course. Because every road here eventually bends back toward the sea. The day fades, a short night passes, and early on the 2nd of April, long before sunrise, the journey turns around. Back in Bastia, the same yellow ship is waiting again, PASCAL LOTA. This time, she is not the unexpected way onto Corsica. She is the way back to Italy. Before departure, Corsica Ferries sends another very clear email. For the return crossing, I am asked to be at Terminal Nord in the port of Bastia at 5:30. This time, though, I arrive with the Livorno experience still fresh in my mind, having learned that official port times can have a rather flexible relationship with actual port reality. So I do not present myself at 5:30 with heroic obedience. I arrive at 6:10. Inside the port, the situation becomes less informative than expected. There is a large, perfectly respectable departure board, and it tells me almost nothing. No clear reference to my sailing and no indication of the correct marshalling lane. At 6:15, a second display finally shows the missing information. By now, quite a few vehicles are waiting and the return journey can get moving. By the way, that gentle gong you keep hearing in the background is the car. This is a fairly new rental, and modern cars have developed a rich emotional life. They no longer simply drive, they comment, they advise. And the strange part is I cannot always tell what they want. This one gongs at moments I understand, like an open door or a missing seatbelt, and it gongs at moments I do not understand at all. Sometimes I sit there, fairly sure I have done everything right, while the car quietly disagrees. I remember earlier journeys to Corsica when a car was simply a car. It started, it drove, it stopped, and it kept its thoughts to itself. Now I get a discrete stream of signals whose exact meaning remains, at least to me, a gentle mystery. And yes, I am wearing my seatbelt, and yes, the parking brake is released. I have checked twice. The car remains unconvinced. At exactly 8:34, the lines come off and the journey begins. 34 minutes late, the return to Italy is underway. This time though, the delay does not trouble me in the slightest. On the way back, I have left myself plenty of time, and a late departure is simply something to note, not something to worry about. Livorno comes into view, and this time the situation is pleasantly different. Before departure, Corsica Ferries informed passengers by email that the sailing would leave Bastia late, and that arrival in Livorno would be delayed as well. They even apologized in advance. Fair enough. But reality now appears to be doing something more helpful than the email suggested. The ship seems to have made up the delay at sea, most likely by running faster than planned. And I like that. If a ferry can recover lost time, and actually does, that is good service, just useful. And after the first crossing, useful is a quality I am very willing to appreciate. PASCAL LOTA has not merely reduced the delay, she has turned it into an early arrival. Livorno is reached ahead of schedule, with about 20 minutes still to go until the planned arrival at 1300. After the delay warning before departure, that is a genuinely nice surprise. And if a ferry company warns its passengers in good time, apologizes in advance, and then still brings them in before schedule, that is more than efficient. That is the kind of service that quietly earns a passenger's trust. As I head back down toward the vehicle deck, it is time for a final word on PASCAL LOTA. Personally, I like this ferry a great deal. She feels clean, well kept and well suited to this route between Italy and Corsica. The large glazed forward space is clearly one of her highlights, giving the interior a sense of height and character that many ferries simply do not have. The aft lounge, spread across 2 decks, is another strong point, offering space, light and a proper place to spend time during the crossing. In short, the ship makes a good impression on this service. There is one point I would reconsider. The closed-off outside areas along the rails are a real loss for passengers who enjoy being close to the sea. On her sister ship Moby Aki, these areas are open and freely accessible, and from a passenger's point of view that works better. Operationally, PASCAL LOTA seems to have useful speed reserves. On the return crossing they were used very effectively. On the way out, rather less so. The communication before the delayed return sailing was good. Corsica Ferries informed passengers by email, explained the expected delay and gave the reason, which in this case was the weather. That is exactly the kind of information passengers need. The port arrival times, however, could be handled better. If passengers are told to arrive at a certain time, but the marshalling lanes are not yet open, vehicles simply gather outside the system. That creates waiting, confusion and small circular driving careers that nobody really needs. All in all, I enjoyed both crossings on this ferry. PASCAL LOTA is a strong ship, Corsica Ferries delivered a good overall service, and I would recommend both the ferry and the route. And for anyone in a real hurry, top position did work, at least in my case. Sometimes €20 by exactly the right few meters of vehicle deck. Thank you very much for joining me on this crossing, and until next time.